Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Franchise Hockey Manager 9 playthrough of the rebuilding Chicago Blackhawks. We are at the beginning of February 2023, and we have just over a month until the trade deadline, so it's going to be a very busy month for these Blackhawks, likely involving moving on from many of our veteran players. It's been a respectable season for the Blackhawks with 50 points so far. We are well on the outside of the playoff race looking in, but given that ownership is really only hoping that we avoid finishing in last place, and they acknowledge that we're rebuilding, our job security should be pretty decent. We do have a very harmonious team right now, so I worry a little bit about the impact that trading away some key players could have on that team. And the key player that we're going to be probably trading away imminently is longtime Blackhawks star, future Hall of Famer, three-time Stanley Cup champion, Jonathan Toews. He is not quite what he used to be. You can see he's got 26 points for us in 41 games and a team best 21 assists. So he's still been a productive player. But our scout overall kind of views him as a middle-of-the-pack kind of player at this point. And his production over the last few years has certainly moved in the wrong direction. He's 34 years old. He's going to be 35 right after the end of this season. And he's looking for over $15 million a year for next year. So we are approaching the All-Star game. So we don't have another game that we're actually going to be playing for several days now. And there's no All-Stars on the Blackhawks. But given that we know we're not going to be bringing back Toews for $15 million next year, given that we're in a rebuild and getting his salary off the books is going to open up a lot of money for us to perhaps spend on free agents and bring on contracts of younger players who hopefully will be with us for the longer term. I think it's time to move on from him. Worry a little bit that we only received one offer for him when I shopped him right at the end of our last episode. And if I can remember where that offer was. There we go. Yeah, the only offer we received from him, well, we received two, or no, we really did receive only one offer. A sixth round pick from the Calgary Flames, which is obviously almost worthless and not what you would expect for an all-time great. And we're certainly going to potentially take a hit to our job security when we move on from such a popular player who's been with the team a long time. And he's also one of the leaders of the team, so our excellent harmony may move in the wrong direction. But I still think that at this point, knowing that we're going to move on from him, we would rather get something than nothing. But I'm going to see if we can maybe put a deal together with Calgary where we can take back something that's not particularly valuable that they have in return and hopefully end up coming out of it with better than a sixth round pick, even if we have to give up something else in return ourselves. And unfortunately, we really just can't work anything out with the Flames right now. They have a couple of bad contracts, but those players won't get rid of their no trade to come to the Blackhawks. I don't know whether or not that may change over the next couple of weeks, but we'll check in again. Certainly hope that we can figure out a way to extract some value out of Mr. Toews before we lose him for nothing at the end of this year, though. And we did get Caleb Jones re-signed to a 3-year contract, so the defenseman will be back with us next year, having a respectable season for us, playing over 20 minutes a game. -2 plus minus, but for the Blackhawks, that really is not horrible. Hopefully, those plus minuses on our team will turn in a different direction over the next few seasons as we start winning more on the ice. And we're also looking to move on from our backup goalie, Peter Mrazek. He's going to be making pretty good money again next year, $3.8 million. And we did recently re-sign Anthony Stolarz, who we picked up on the waiver wire at the beginning of the season, to a $2.4 million contract for the next 3 years. Neither of these guys is a all-star goalie, but Stolarz is a little younger, a little better, and a little less expensive going forward. So we're going to move on from Mrazek as soon as possible. We did get 2 offers for him. 22-year-old left wing Dylan Hamiluk from the San Jose organization. We're inclined to take that trade. The Wild offered us 29-year-old defenseman Dakota Mermis, who is a free agent at the end of this season, probably someone we'd be unlikely to re-sign. Don't really know that Hamiluk is going to become a big-time defenseman, but he is a little organizational depth for us, and he's not going to become a defenseman because he's a left wing, if I could read. The defenseman was offered to us by the Wild. Going to see if maybe we can get a draft pick instead from these 2 teams for Mrazek, but if not, we're going to go ahead with the left winger Hamiluk. And given the amount of money Mrazek is making, doesn't seem like there's any better deal out there to get that contract off the books for next year than taking on Hamiluk. So we're going to go ahead and complete the trade, move on from Mrazek, and that will allow us to bring back up Mr. Stalock, who we sent down right at the beginning of this season when we brought Stolarz on board. Hasn't been a great performance for Stalock and Rockford. 2-1 record in 3 games, 292 goals against average. So I guess he's been respectable. Probably underestimating what he's done a little bit, but the 35-year-old is unlikely to be back with us next season, and the hope is that Stolarz can continue to play the majority of games in front of the net for us over the course of this season now that we have moved on from Mr. Mrazek. And with the trade away of Mrazek and some of the other recent moves we've made, our salary is getting dangerously close to the floor. So particularly if we move on from Taves, we're probably going to have to take some salary back in return at some point, or perhaps just make a trade for someone who's not really all that exciting. Fortunately, there are some pretty mediocre players on the trade block at this point. So in a worst case scenario, we can make a trade for a player like Evgeny Dadonov, who's in the last year of his contract with the Canadiens, and give them hopefully just a little bit to take someone like him on board. Even Miles Wood here from the Devils is another example of the type of player we might end up having a trade for just to get a 1-year contract back to keep ourselves above the minimum salary. But as long as we're only taking on a 1-year contract and we're not having to give up more than we're getting in return from taking off some additional players, it is probably a move that would make sense for the long-term goals of the Blackhawks. And another player we might move on from is center Max Domi. At 27 years old, he's young enough that he could be a useful player for us. He's got some decent physical skills and particularly some pretty sound offensive skills. Hasn't been particularly good this year. I mean, 26 goals in 43 games for this Blackhawks team means that he's one of our better scorers, but is still -6 on the year. Game rating of 68, which again is good for the Blackhawks, but probably not what we're looking for a big-time team in a few years. He's unpopular with his teammates, and he's also looking for $5.5 million a year next year if we were to re-sign him. So although we can get him for a little less than that, I'm sure, we're going to at the very least see what the trade market for him looks like today. And there are at least a few options for him. And despite there being 7 offers, none of the offers for Domi are all that exciting. We're actually just going to go with the team that offered us a draft pick. Arizona offered us a 4th rounder. Not particularly valuable, but it's something that could become somewhat valuable in the future. Something that we might be able to, before we get to the draft, package in another trade that puts us in a better position for the long term, given that I don't think we want to be playing $5.5 million a year to Domi going forward. I think we're going to go ahead and complete this trade also. So we're definitely stripping away a lot of the talent on our team at this point, but the goal is to get assets that hopefully can help us in the future. And if we know we're not going to be re-signing a player, let's try to get something for him now. If we were in the middle of really playing for the playoffs or fighting for a Stanley Cup, it might be a little different, but we've got enough insurance, I believe, when you look broadly at how far the Coyotes are behind us, that I don't think we need to worry about being a last place team, that even though we're giving up some talent and weakening our roster for this year, I still think it's the right decision for the long-term rebuild of these Blackhawks to get some draft assets and quite honestly maybe be a little worse in the standings and give ourselves a little bit better chance of a better draft pick this coming off season. And the move away from Domi does allow us to bring a youngster up to the team. Brought Evan Barrett up, 23-year-old, who had scored 27 points in 43 games in Rockford. You can see he's been there for most of the past 3 seasons. Don't know that he's got a big future with our team, but he is in the last year of his contract and kind of want to figure out exactly what we have with him. May not be someone who's with us for the long term, but at least he gives us a little bit of a youth movement. And the Blackhawks have been playing pretty crappy hockey here. We won our first game against Anaheim coming out of the All-Star break, but then we've subsequently lost 4 games in a row. Clearly moving on from some of our better players probably hasn't helped us. Obviously took a hit when we moved on from Mrazek and Domi, and then we've been losing games. One thing that we may look to switch is that Stalock has not been good in his 2 games, 0-2 with a 5.54 goals against average. And the Stars did just put goalie Phoenix Copley on waivers. Believe he's a little better than Stolarz is. So, and he's also in the final year of his contract, so we're not making any long-term commitment. So we're going to go ahead and put in a claim on Copley, and if we get him, we will send Stolarz back down to the AHL. And our waiver claim of Copley did go through, so given that we view him as a better option than Stolarz, we are, or not Stolar, Stalock. I think I've been saying the wrong thing. Stolars we want to keep, but we think that in terms of his physical ability, Copley hopefully can be a little better than Stalock. Stalock's obviously been brutal in the limited time that we've had him, so we're going to send him down to Rockford, and hopefully Copley can give us a little bit better performance than Stalock had been. And as we get near the end of February, we tried shopping Taves again. Once again, the only offer we got was a 6th rounder from the Flames. Trying to find something we can do better than that with them, but just don't have the players to make it work who are willing to come to the Blackhawks. So the question now is, do we want to trade him away for only a 6th round pick, or just keep him for the rest of the season? We did play a little bit better following the change in our goalie. We did win 3 in a row when we brought on the new backup, although we now have lost 2 straight as we get closer to the end of the month. And we've made it through the month of February, closing in on the trade deadline. Definitely played better once we moved on from Stalock. You can see we won our last couple of games at the end of the month, including a shutout against the Coyotes. And clearly, when you look at what Copley has done for us, 2-1 record with a shutout, 2.06 goals against in 4 games played, has definitely played much better in the small sample size he's had with us this year than Stalock did in his very small sample size before we sent him back down to the AHL. So as we get to the point where we really need to make some final decisions on whether we're going to trade anyone away, team harmony still in a really good spot. And we have kind of limited the number of unpopular players, which is positive. Although the addition of Evan Barrett gives us an outspoken player. He's not with us for the long term, so not the end of the world. Overall, the locker room seems to be in very good shape. Looking at our job security, still pretty solid. Playing a little better more recently, which is good. Taking a look at the standings, we're definitely falling out of the playoff race. Not that we thought we really had much of a chance, but still up 22 points on the Coyotes, so definitely will be avoiding last place, which is something in the right direction. Take a look at the wild card standings, though, and we're actually the first team out, which is a little surprising. The issue is we're 5 points back of the Jets, and we're tied with the Stars. So we're actually closer than I thought we would be. It's good to actually look at the standings and see how things look. So it's been a respectable year. I don't think we're going to make the playoffs, particularly with the fact that we have traded away some of our better players. I don't know that I want to make the playoffs, given that I think we'll be a first round exit if we do make the playoffs, and it might be better for us long term to have this kind of be the worst year of hopefully our tenure as GM/coach of the Blackhawks, and hopefully get a draft pick who will be helping us in the not so distant future. But right now we're kind of on the borderline. I don't think we make a bunch of trades to go for it because we don't have a team that can win the Stanley Cup this year. We're also going to be getting Tampa Bay's pick, but they're also in the East, not all that far from the playoff race. They're actually only 3 points out. So in a perfect world, we'd almost play a little worse, but certainly not going to try to force the guys to play worse on the ice. We'll get what we get out of them. Really, last couple decisions we need to make are, do we really want to get rid of Taves? went phonetically, so I was talking quickly about him there for some reason. We'll shop him again. I have a feeling it's just going to be a 6th rounder from Calgary, which is what it's been for a while. Yep. So we do have the option to move on from him if we want. I don't know that we do want that. Other than that, the question is just, what do we want to do with Kara and Kurashev? Kurashev's young enough that I think we want to bring him back. The issue is he's been looking for a little more money than I think he's really worth. He's got 28 points in 53 games, only -1. Not a dynamic offensive player. His game rating is actually pretty decent for our team. He's looking for over $3 million a year. Not that it's a ton of money, but he's also unpopular with his teammates. But we are going to need players at some point next year. We're a little more over the salary cap now that we've gotten Connor Murphy back from the injured list. So it's getting, not that we can't sign him in the off season before he actually hits free agency. And then Kara's the other guy to think about. He's looking for about $2.5 million. I like the grinder. I like the fact that he can hit some people. He's not a bad kind of player to have on a team. He's definitely got a useful role to play, and the money that he's looking for right now is not excessive. Not sure what I'm going to do, but I'm going to have to decide it pretty quickly. So we did end up making an offer to Kara for $2.5 million a year for 3 years. We'll see what happens with that. He wasn't too happy with us by the time we finally got him to say he'd think about the offer. And we did make sure that at the very least we have Kurashev marked with a qualifying offer. So we're going to auto-qualify him automatically, even if we can't figure something out. So thinking about bringing back both of those players. Taves at this point, I think he's still probably leading us in assists, although I think he has slowed down a bit. Actually, yeah, he no longer is leading us in assists. Kane, who somewhat inexplicably was left off the All-Star team, is now leading us in both goals and assists. So he's having a nice year for us. But Taves is still second on the team in assists, even though his goal scoring at this point is not all that exotic and special. Contract demand has come down to a little under $13 million a year, but for what he is at this point, I just don't think there's any possible way I can justify paying that kind of money for a soon-to-be 35-year-old when we're in a rebuilding process. Just doesn't make sense. So I think what I'm kind of saying is we either need to trade him or just let him play out the contract this year. And if all we can get for him is a 6th rounder, I almost feel like we're better off keeping him on the team, kind of avoiding the hit to our job security that we'll take from moving on from him. But we're going to take the hit when he moves on next year. And I do wish there was something that we could do to open up a spot for another center. Kind of some of the guys that we've picked up recently, like Anderson Dolan, who we picked up through waivers. Kind of wish we didn't have him, or Sundqvist, who is the same thing on the team right now, because we would like to potentially get a little bit of a longer look at the NHL level at Cole Gutman, who's obviously ready. He's got 53 points in 45 games in the AHL, including 24 goals plus 14. And he did decently when he was up for a little bit earlier this year. 5 games, 3 assists, even plus minus. He wasn't on the ice all that often, but would like to see a little bit more of him. And clearly moving on from Taves would allow us to bring him up. So some decent news in our monthly evaluation. Fans satisfied with the job they're doing, and ownership agrees with the approach that we've taken. Not expecting to be a serious contender next year, but not planning on a total rebuild either. We did get Kara signed to the extension I was talking about, $2.5 million a year over 3 years. It's kind of our last time to do something. The trade deadline's tomorrow, so if we want to get anything done, now is the time to do it. I don't think anything is going to change with Taves, but might as well see at the end of the trade deadline. Calgary still looking at that 6th rounder in next year's draft. That's all we can get for him. So kind of time to make a decision there. Also going to just take a look at the players who are available on the trading block at this point. Some interesting players. I can't imagine we're going to be able to pull a deal together for any of these top players that are out there, but it doesn't hurt to look at these things at this point. And we were looking to see if we could do something with Taves. And we've actually come up with a deal that intrigues me a little bit. It looks like Vancouver's not going to be able to sign free agent to be Bo Horvat. And we can pick him up for what seems pretty reasonable. We need to give a 3rd and a 7th, and then a couple of players who we have their rights, but particularly in the case of Shalunov, is a 30-year-old, not a bad prospect, not a great prospect, but he's 30 years old, like I said. I mean, he scored more than a point a game in the KHL this year, but we had tried to bring him over right when the Sims started and couldn't. Victor Ejdsell, another player who's a little bit older at this point. We still have the rights to. I think unlikely to ever come and make a difference in the NHL. And it gives us the chance to bring on a pretty good player and maybe lock him up before he hits free agency. Now, I don't know exactly what he's looking for in terms of a contract, and we won't until we bring him on board. It's probably a pretty big number, but it's probably also less than what Taves is looking for. And I think he's a better player than Taves at this point. He's clearly a better player than Taves at this point. He's scored 30 goals. When he gets his next goal, he's going to have scored 30 goals in 2 straight seasons for Vancouver. He's their captain. I just don't totally get why he's on the trade block. I mean, they're on the periphery of the playoff race. They're behind us, so they're probably not going to make the playoffs because we're probably not going to make the playoffs. You know, looking at his personality, he's obviously a captain for them. Looking at the scouting report, going to stay out of trouble, adapt to new surroundings without a problem. He is kind of at the peak of what he's going to be at 27 years old, but he probably has several good years ahead of him. We're not giving all that much to bring him on board, and I'd rather just lock up a player like him right now for next year than risk having to go for him on the open market. I'm a little scared of what his number might be, because you would think that Vancouver would want to bring back their captain rather than move on from him. So that absolutely scares me a little bit. I just don't totally get why the Canucks have him on the trade block. Well, clearly they're not bringing him back next year. We're not giving up all that much. I mean, a third-round pick this coming year certainly has some value, but you can see we've already got 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and would still have our own third even if we gave this up. I don't think that either Shalunov or Edsel is a big-time prospect for us. I think they'll probably accept it. I just don't know if we have enough time to get a response back from them. What do we have to do to make this work? Who's willing to consider it without? I just think we might have not given ourselves enough time by just figuring this out right now. I have to increase our offer a little. All right, well, we'll increase we'll throw in a 6th rounder instead. Well, we're not gonna probably accept this offer. I think we may have just waited a little too long. I'm certainly not going to give them 2 third-rounders for a guy that we might not be able to sign. Well, at least the make this work means something here. I don't know if we want to give up any of these guys, but Horvat is better than any of these players. I don't really want to give up Fermentin now that we've got him. We've still got to keep thinking about this. I just can't come up with anything that makes the Horvat trade work. I guess at this point, my hope is that he does make it to free agency. He's expected to, and Vancouver's got him on the trade block. Clearly they could trade him to someone else, but it doesn't make sense to me that they're not trying to re-sign him and they haven't already re-signed him. If he does end up making it to free agency, maybe we can add him in the off season this year without having to give up a bunch of players and picks for him. We kind of gave up on the trades. Might be too late to get something done. We did get a 5-0 win, and we are now at the trade deadline if we move forward. Well, I guess technically the trade deadline is tomorrow, so still can try to do something else. We'll go ahead and move forward to the trade deadline. We'll keep seeing if we can get something done. I just don't think we really need to do anything else. We're not really trying to win this year. We'll shop Taves one last time. Guessing it's going to be a 6th rounder next year from Calgary. Yes, it is. And we've got a deal now for Horvat. We have to give up 2 third rounders in addition to Shalunov and Edsel. But it gets him onto our team now, where we can hopefully make an offer for him. Those third rounders aren't without some value, but they're not premium picks. The prospects are both aging. Horvat is a really good player. He's solid physically, he's solid mentally, he's good offensively, he's good defensively. He brings a lot to the table, and you can see he can fit just about any type of role you'd want him to as a forward in an above average way. I'm going to go ahead and make this trade. And it may encourage us to move on from Taves. Help if I would look at my team. So we got a little bump in fan happiness from being on Horvat. Let's take a look and see what he's looking for in terms of a contract. Because now we want to get him signed. Oh, yes. $6.5 million for 3 years. Absolutely. I think this was a good move to bring him on board. Hate to lose the 2 third-round draft choices, and the prospects were older, particularly with the Russian. I think he was certainly a player who could play in the NHL, but he was 30 years old. He wasn't a big part of our future. But we're just going to go ahead and try to get an offer out to Horvat, get him signed. I think this is a really good move for our team. He gives us another pretty dynamic offensive player to kind of be paired up with Kane for the next couple of years and hopefully give us an opportunity to score some goals and be a better team. We're going to try to go a little longer and a little less money, $6.25 million a year over 5 years. See what he thinks of that. He's willing to think about it, so we're going to go ahead and submit that offer to him. So hopefully we're going to get Bo Horvat signed into his early 30s at what I think is a pretty reasonable number. And so now we've got to open up a roster spot. The obvious way to do it is to trade away Taves now and get something for him rather than nothing. I would think, given that he's been such a great player for Chicago for such a long time and he's our captain, that it's not going to be great for team harmony to move on from him. And the hit that we're going to take to fan happiness is going to more than overwhelm the +3 that we got for bringing on Horvat. But we can at least get a pick back. It's going to be a 6th round pick. And what other center can we get rid of? Dickinson's a pretty good player. We've got him signed for next year. Sundqvist, I'd like to trade him, but last I shopped him a day or two ago, there were no offers for him. Nobody wants Sundqvist, and we can't get rid of him because we picked him up off of waivers. So we can't just send him down to the AHL, I don't think. I'll try it. Yeah, we can't move him down there. Anderson, Dolan, and Barrett are young with some potential. I guess Lafferty's got 2 years left. He's kind of the odd man out at this point. Could shop him and see what we can get for Lafferty potentially. Just don't see him having a big role on this team, especially with Horvat around now. Would have preferred a draft pick. We can get an old defenseman in Michael Stone. It's a decent stay-at-home defenseman, it looks like. Or a 25-year-old winger in Giovanni Smith. So neither of those is really all that exciting. Stone's in the last year of his contract. Tightens up our defense a little bit, maybe. Just not a lot there. I think we're going to take the hit now and say goodbye to Mr. Taves. And that'll allow us to promote Mr. Kane to captain. And it'll probably allow us to also put A on the chest of Mr. Horvat. He's got big shoes to fill as the replacement for Taves, but we're not signing him next year. And take a look at what he's looking for. Almost $13 million with a bunch of bonuses that he probably won't reach, although he could still have top 6 ice time. We're going to piss off the fans right now. Just take the hit to fan interest at this point. Thank you for a wonderful tenure in Chicago, Mr. Taves. And enjoy your time in Calgary. Yeah, big hit. He's more popular and a long-time player, so big 8-point hit to fan happiness, but we got something for him, and we've kind of preempted the hit that we might get when he leaves in the off-season anyways. So we've added Horvat. Hopefully we can get him signed. As I said, 2 third-rounders isn't nothing, as well as a couple of players that we had rights to who could be decent to maybe an above-average NHL player, but Horvat we know is more than a decent to above-average NHL player, so we are going to give the C to Mr. Kane. Move Connor Murphy up a notch. And Horvat, who was wearing that C in Vancouver for many seasons at this point, is now wearing an A again, but he's wearing it for Chicago. And I don't think there's anything left for us to do. We've made a lot of trades in these first several months running the Blackhawks. Bringing on a player like Horvat, who apparently was not going to re-sign with Vancouver, is a big bonus for us. We're going to wait and see what happens with that contract, and then we're going to finish up this episode. But we'll find out whether we were able to get him signed to that 5-year contract at what we think is a pretty reasonable number. And if we've got him on board with the new captain, Patrick Kane, I think at least we're starting to build something. Obviously, Kane is not going to be with us for the long term as a 34-year-old, but we did get him signed to that very reasonable extension, I believe, back in our first or second episode of this series. So if we can team him up with Horvat for the next few years, and we're paying those two guys combined what Taves was looking for, I think we've played this reasonably well for the Blackhawks. And unfortunately, those of you with a good eye probably saw this, but something I had mentioned earlier in the episode has happened. We are now below the salary cap floor. So we are going to have to make a move to just bring on somebody who's not that good and making a little bit of money. Hopefully we won't have to give up too much to make it happen. But we'll go back just for ease of hopefully getting this done quickly. Go back to the trade block and try to find a pretty crappy player who's making a decent amount of money. Miles Wood from the Devils. Don't know that he's a crappy player, but he is a player who's certainly making more than the minimum. And we can pick up Miles Wood. We have to give up a couple of 6th and a 7th in the upcoming draft. But honestly, with the fact that we've got 2 firsts, 2 seconds, still have a 3rd, 2 fourths, and a 5th, we're going to be able to pick up a decent amount of talent this year. And we've also got to give up a couple of older players that we have the rights to. Again, a couple of Russian players. I don't think the goalie Nalimov is ever going to really become anything useful. It does look like Kayamov could maybe be a NHL player down the line, but he's 25 years old. According to our scouts, he's certainly not really ready for the NHL yet. So not giving up anything of incredible value to bring on the salary of Wood. So we're going to go ahead and finalize that trade. I should have looked whether Wood had a bad personality, and he is unpopular. There probably would have been other players we could have brought on, but he's not going to be here for the long term, obviously in the final year of his contract. So that does mean that we're going to have to send down a younger player or a player who's not a big part of our future to kind of get back down to 23 players on the roster. So we'll give that some thought. And I think the easiest thing to do is probably to send Barrett back down to the AHL. And now we're above the floor, which is good. And when we look at our I can figure out where I want to look. Got something interesting to talk about. Well, I don't know that it's that interesting to talk about. But if we look at our salary obligations for next year now, only $48 million. Hopefully we're going to be adding another $6.5 million to that. But even so, we should be heading into free agency with the opportunity to, if there is somebody we like, we definitely have the money to strike. And we did get Bo Horvat signed to that 5-year deal, so I think this worked out really well for us. $6.25 million a year for the next 5 years. Going to take him up into his early 30s with us. Feel that we've got a better roster for next year than we had not that long ago. Fans aren't happy that Taves is gone, but he wasn't part of our long-term solution. I think Horvat is better at this point. He's younger, and he's less expensive. That's a win-win-win as far as I'm concerned. So with Horvat now signed, we're going to play one more game today against Nashville. That'll put us at 62 games, so we'll leave us with 20 games to go, more than 3/4 of the way through the season, and we'll finish up the season in our next episode. And in this first game, we're going to make sure that Horvat is in the lineup, and Wood, who we brought on simply for his salary, is not going to be in the lineup. And we did get the win against Nashville. And Horvat, 3 assists in his first game. Got a goal and 2 assists from Kane. And then the defenseman Mitchell got a goal and an assist from him. Got off to a very fast start. Fomentin, a minute into the game. Mitchell, Reese Johnson, and Taylor Radish. Before the 12-minute mark of the first period, Blackhawks were up 4-0. Hung on to get the 6-3 victory. And it was a particularly good victory for us to get because our backup goalie, Copley, was the one who was in the nets. And he's been productive for us so far. 3-1 record, 2.26 goals against. So certainly that addition has also helped us out, allowing us to send the veteran Stalock back to the AHL. Taking a look at the standings, I don't think we're a playoff team. Haven't even been honestly trying to make this team a playoff team. Have really kind of been hoping that we would, I don't want to say have a bad season, but have a mediocre season and ultimately end up with a decent draft position for this coming year to get us a young player to build around. We are going to get the Lightning's pick. They look like they're going to miss the playoffs. We're the first team out at this point. We're only 2 games behind. Obviously, with 20 games to go, a lot of things can happen. And we're not necessarily focused on winning, but the team is playing real well right now with 4 wins in a row. So we'll find out in our next episode how those last 20 games of the season go. Do we somehow inexplicably end up in the playoffs, or do we kind of fade back past a few of these teams down the stretch and end up in a position to potentially have a little bit of a better draft pick in the upcoming draft? Because although I feel like we've definitely made a big step in the right direction bringing on Horvat, and we do have in our system some pretty interesting young prospects with Reichel, Doc, Korchinski, Allen. Would absolutely like to bring some more pretty significant talent into this organization when we get to the draft next summer. So going to be a lot of interesting things ahead for the Blackhawks, and we'll find out how the rest of the season goes in our next episode. Would certainly love to hear what you think about the trades we made down below. Any other criticisms, suggestions, thoughts are always appreciated. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.